Hello, welcome back to the Phantom Diary channel. I'm sure there are many of you listening to my stories to fall asleep. Before we start, write in the comments what country you're listening from. If you feel fear, you should like and subscribe to this channel. Let's go. There's something about the deep woods that always calls to me. Maybe it's the quiet, or the way the trees seem to stand like ancient guardians watching over secrets older than time. Whatever it was, I found myself drawn back into the forest. Last summer with 3 close friends for a weekend camping trip. We drove in late afternoon, the sun hanging low, filtering through the towering pines. The air smelled fresh and alive. We picked a clearing near a small creek, far from the usual hiking trails, where the moss was thick and the ground soft beneath our feet. Setting up tents and gathering firewood was easy, laughter light and carefree. As night fell, we built a fire, the flames crackling and throwing flickering shadows across the tree trunks. The forest was alive with nocturnal sounds. Frogs croaking, owls calling, leaves rustling in the breeze. It was peaceful, almost hypnotic. We passed around a flashlight and told stories, the usual ghost tales and local legends, none of us expecting anything real. But as the fire died down, I noticed something strange. From the edge of the clearing, just beyond where the firelight reached, there was a movement, a flicker of shadow slipping between the trees. I pointed it out, but my friends laughed it off. "It's just a deer," Mike said, his voice steady. But it wasn't a deer. The shadow didn't move like any animal I knew. It was slow and deliberate, almost humanoid, but impossible to see clearly. The forest seemed to grow colder, and a sudden stillness fell over everything. No wind, no animal calls, just a thick silence pressing in. I felt a prickle on the back of my neck, the kind of feeling that tells you something is very wrong. "Maybe we should pack up," I said quietly, trying to keep calm. But Sarah shook her head. "It's probably just the wind, or our eyes playing tricks." Still, none of us could deny the unease settling in. I grabbed my flashlight and swept the beam toward the shadow, but it vanished, leaving only empty trees swaying gently. Minutes passed, and the fire sparked back to life as Mike threw on some dry branches. The sounds of the forest slowly returned, the night alive again, but different. The oppressive silence was gone, replaced by something watchful. Later, as we prepared to turn in, I heard it, a low whispering, so soft it was barely more than the rustling of leaves. But it wasn't wind. It sounded like voices speaking just beyond the trees, speaking in a language none of us knew. I called out, "Who's there?" But the voices only faded, like a breeze slipping through the branches. Sleep was difficult. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the presence of something watching me from the darkness outside our tents. Around midnight, I woke to a strange sensation. The tent's fabric seemed to ripple, as if something brushed against it. I held my breath, heart pounding. Outside, the whispering grew louder. I could hear it clearly now, soft words, urgent but unintelligible. I crawled out quietly, flashlight in hand, and stepped into the night. The moon was hidden behind clouds, but the forest was lit faintly by the stars. The whispers led me toward the creek, where the water flowed silently over smooth stones. There, by the water's edge, I saw a figure. Not quite human, but not animal either. It was tall and thin, its skin pale and glowing faintly in the dark. Its eyes shone like embers, ancient and sorrowful. It didn't speak, but the whispers filled my mind with a strange, aching sadness. I wanted to run, but my feet were rooted. Then the figure raised a hand, pointing upstream, toward a narrow path winding into the woods. I understood. This was a guardian of the forest, a lost soul trapped between worlds, warning me of something. I nodded slowly and stepped back, the whispers fading as the figure disappeared into the shadows. When I returned to camp, my friends were awake, their faces pale but relieved to see me safe. "We thought you were gone," Sarah said. I told them what I'd seen and heard. None of us slept well after that, but when dawn finally broke, the forest felt peaceful again, as if the night's shadow had lifted. We packed up, leaving the clearing behind. I glanced back once more and thought I saw a faint glow between the pines, a reminder that the forest watches, waiting, guarding its secrets. And I knew I would never forget the night the woods whispered to me. I always thought I knew what it meant to be alone in the woods. Growing up near a forested mountain range, I spent countless nights camping with friends, laughing around campfires, telling stories, and listening to the chorus of crickets and owls. But one weekend changed everything I thought I understood about the forest's silence. It started with a plan to escape the city and its relentless noise. My 3 closest friends, Emma, Jake, and Sarah, and I packed our gear and drove. 3 hours deep into the heart of the Hollow Pine National Forest. The name alone felt ominous, but we were eager for an adventure. We hiked for hours, the trail winding through towering pines whose needles muffled our footsteps like a thick carpet. The sun hung low, casting long shadows that stretched and twisted between the trees. We found the perfect spot to set up camp beside a small moss-covered clearing bordered by a shallow creek. As dusk fell, we built a fire and unpacked our food. The forest around us was alive with sound, the chirping of crickets, the rustling of leaves, and the distant call of a barred owl. Everything felt normal, almost comforting. We shared ghost stories to match the darkening woods, laughing at our own nervousness. That's when I first noticed it, the faintest sound, like an echo coming from deep within the forest. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but then it came again. A soft, rhythmic tapping, like footsteps, but not human. It wasn't near the campfire or the creek. It came from the shadows beyond the trees. "Did you hear that?" I asked, voice barely above a whisper. Emma shrugged. "Probably just an animal." Jake shone his flashlight toward the sound, but all we saw were swaying branches and flickering shadows. Still, the tapping continued, steady, slow, and eerily deliberate. As the night grew colder, the tapping was joined by a strange whispering. It wasn't words, just low murmurs blending with the wind. The whispers seemed to circle us, growing louder and softer like a haunting melody. "We should check it out," Sarah said, eyes wide but curious. Against my better judgment, we grabbed flashlights and followed the sounds into the woods. The path was faint, almost invisible beneath fallen leaves and broken twigs. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. Suddenly, the forest fell silent. The tapping stopped. The whispers vanished. We froze. A cold breeze swept through the trees, carrying the faint scent of something earthy and sweet, like damp moss and old wood. Then, in the pale glow of our flashlights, I saw it. A circle of old stones, half buried in the moss, arranged like a forgotten altar. In the center lay a small, intricately carved wooden figure. It looked like a person, but with exaggerated features. Long, limbs, hollow eyes, and a crooked smile. Jake reached down and picked it up, and the whispers returned, this time louder and clearer. The voice wasn't human, but felt ancient, as if the forest itself was speaking. Suddenly, the air grew heavy. The fireflies that had danced nearby stopped moving, and the night creatures fell silent. We hurried back to camp, the wooden figure clutched in Jake's hand. Back at the fire, the figure seemed to glow faintly in the firelight. None of us wanted to touch it again. The whispers lingered for hours, never fully fading, as if the forest was watching, waiting. By dawn, the sun's rays pierced the canopy, and the forest came alive once more. We buried the figure deep in the moss near the creek and left the clearing. As we packed up to leave, I glanced back one last time. Between the trees, I thought I saw a shadow, a slender shape with glowing eyes, watching us go. But we were unharmed, just visitors to a place older and stranger than we could imagine. That night, the forest had shared its secret, whispered its warning, but left us free to leave. There's something about the deep woods that gets under your skin. The way the shadows gather, the silence that's louder than any city noise, and the feeling that you're never truly alone. I learned that one late autumn weekend when my friends and I went camping in Hollow Pine Woods. We'd picked a remote spot by a small forgotten lake, the kind of place where the only trails are deer paths and the trees crowd close enough to block out the stars. The air was crisp, smelling of pine needles and wet earth. Our fire crackled and popped, casting flickering light on the rough bark of the towering trees. The first night was peaceful. We joked, roasted marshmallows, and told stories beneath the vast black sky. But around midnight, everything changed. It started with the echoes. At first, it was just faint, like the forest itself was whispering. Then, from somewhere deep beyond the firelight, I heard a voice. Not a shout or a scream, but a slow, deliberate call. My name. I froze. "Did you hear that?" I asked, voice barely above a whisper. My friends shrugged. "It's probably an animal," one said, though his tone was uneasy. But it wasn't an animal. The voice came again, clearer this time. "Come. Back." The sound echoed through the trees, a low, haunting plea. Against my better judgment, I grabbed my flashlight and shone it toward the sound. The beam cut through the thick darkness, revealing nothing but twisting branches and shadows. "Maybe it's just the wind playing tricks," I said, though I didn't believe it. The others weren't convinced. They urged me to stay by the fire, but the voice kept calling, growing softer and more desperate, like someone lost and trying to find their way home. I followed the sound into the woods, heart hammering in my chest. The deeper I went, the colder it became, and the night seemed to close around me like a living thing. The voice stopped suddenly as I reached a small clearing I hadn't seen before. Moonlight spilled onto a large, moss-covered stone in the center. I knelt beside the stone, the silence pressing down on me. That's when I noticed the carvings, ancient symbols etched into the rock, worn but unmistakable. The language was foreign, but I sensed they were a warning. Then I saw the footprints, small, bare, and fading toward the lake's edge. I turned back, but the path I'd taken was gone, replaced by thick underbrush and tangled roots. Panic surged, but I forced myself to breathe and retrace my steps carefully. As I moved, the voice whispered again, softer now, like a lullaby. "Go back, before night falls." Suddenly, the firelight flickered in the distance, and I heard my friends calling my name. Relief flooded me as I stumbled back toward the camp. When I returned, they were waiting, faces pale but smiling with relief. "I don't know what I heard," I said, voice shaky. One friend nodded. "We heard it too. The forest is alive here, they say, spirits of those who never left." That night, none of us slept well. The whispers faded with the dawn, but the feeling remained, that the woods were watching, waiting. We packed up and left at first light, the echoes of Hollow Pine Woods still ringing in my ears. I never went back, but sometimes, when the wind rustles the trees on a quiet night, I swear I can hear my name, carried softly on the breeze, a reminder that some places hold secrets too deep to ever leave behind. I'd been camping before, but never this deep into the woods. When my friends and I decided to escape the city for a weekend, none of us expected to get this far into the pines. The GPS stopped working hours ago, and all that surrounded us was endless rows of towering trees, their trunks like silent sentinels guarding some ancient secret. We found a clearing by a stream and pitched our tents just as the sun began to slip away behind the hills. The air smelled of damp earth and pine sap, sharp and clean. We built a fire, the flames dancing with an almost unnatural hunger, casting long shadows that swayed across the undergrowth. The first night was uneventful, just stories and laughter, the kind that makes the cold less biting. But around midnight, something changed. I was lying on my back, staring up through the gaps in the canopy, watching stars flicker, when I heard it, a soft, deliberate snap of a twig. I sat up. "Did you guys hear that?" They all looked at me, eyes half-lidded and amused. "Probably just a deer," Mike said, tossing another log on the fire. But I wasn't convinced. The woods were too quiet, too expectant. A few minutes passed. Then I heard it again. Slow, measured footsteps, crunching dry leaves just beyond the firelight. "Mike, seriously, did you hear that?" I asked, voice low. He shrugged. "Probably a raccoon." But something about the way the sound moved, slow, purposeful, didn't sit right. I got up and grabbed my flashlight, shining it in the direction of the noise. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating gnarled roots and twisted branches. Nothing moved. Then the footsteps stopped. Silence pressed down like a heavy fog. Suddenly, I felt it. A prickling sensation at the back of my neck, the unmistakable feeling of being watched. I turned the light slowly, scanning the trees. And then I saw it. A figure standing between two massive pines, just at the edge of the light's reach. I blinked, and it was gone. "Did you see that?" I whispered barely, daring to breathe. "No," the others said, looking worried now. "I told them to stay close. We kept the fire roaring, but the night only grew colder, the shadows deeper." Then came the whispers. Soft at first, like the wind brushing through the needles. Then clearer, words spoken in a language none of us understood, carried on the night. Air. I tried to listen, but my heart pounded too hard. The whispers seemed to circle us, weaving through the trees, impossible to pin down. Suddenly, a pale face appeared at the edge of the firelight. A woman with eyes like dark pools, hair streaming like mist, her expression unreadable. I froze. "Who are you?" I asked. She said nothing, only pointed toward the woods and vanished as quickly as she'd appeared. The whispers ceased. The night returned to its eerie silence. We didn't sleep. At dawn, we packed quickly, eyes darting into the woods with every step. On the trail back, we found strange marks on the trees, deep scratches forming symbols none of us recognized. That night, back in town, the images haunted me. The face in the dark, the whispered warnings. Whatever we encountered in those woods, I knew it was old. Older than any story I'd heard, and it was still watching. I always thought camping was supposed to be peaceful, a way to escape the noise and chaos of everyday life. But nothing about that weekend in the Whispering Pines felt peaceful. In fact, it was one of the most unsettling experiences of my life. Friends and I decided to take a break from the city and go camping deep in the woods, far from any trails or cell service. The Whispering Pines forest was notorious locally for its dense, ancient trees and the strange sounds people claimed to hear there at night. We shrugged it off as stories, ghost tales to scare tourists. We arrived in early October when the leaves were turning orange and the air was crisp but not yet bitter. We found a small clearing beside a shallow stream, surrounded by towering pine trees that seemed to scrape the sky. The scent of pine and damp earth was thick, almost overwhelming. Setting up the tents took a while, but soon the fire was crackling, and we were roasting marshmallows and swapping stories. The woods felt alive, but not in a friendly way. There was a low hum in the air, like the forest itself was breathing. As darkness fell, a cold wind swept through the trees, causing the pine needles to rattle like whispers. It was then the stories started to feel real. I was the first to hear it. A faint murmur just beyond the firelight, like voices speaking in hushed tones. At first, I thought it was my imagination or the wind, but the others heard it too. "Do you hear that?" my friend Mark asked, his voice tense. The whispering grew louder, though I couldn't make out any words. It wasn't the wind, It was deliberate, rhythmic, like chanting. Despite the cold settling into my bones, I felt a strange pull toward the source of the sound. I grabbed my flashlight and stood up. "Let's check it out," I said. "No way," Sarah said quickly. "It's probably nothing. Let's just stay here." But curiosity got the better of me. I told the others I'd be careful, then stepped away from the fire, into the darkness. The whispering led me deeper into the forest, away from the camp and toward a thick copse of trees. The air grew colder, and an eerie silence fell between, each breath of wind. The forest canopy was so dense the moonlight barely filtered through. Then I saw it, a circle of stones, half buried in moss, arranged perfectly on the forest floor. The whispering came from there, surrounding me like a soft chant. I crouched to examine the stones, noticing strange carvings that looked ancient, almost runic. I reached out to touch one when suddenly the whispering stopped. The silence was so complete it roared in my ears. Then, from behind me, I heard footsteps crunching on leaves. I spun around, flashlight trembling in my hand. No one was there, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. I called back to camp, but my voice sounded hollow, swallowed by the trees. I hurried back the way I came, the weight of unseen eyes following me. When I returned to camp, my friends looked worried. "You disappeared for almost an hour," Mark said, his voice low. "I found something," I said, my voice shaking. I showed them the carvings I'd sketched on a piece of paper. They looked at it, but said nothing. That night, we all heard the whispers, clearer and closer. The chanting echoed around our tents, sometimes seeming to come from inside the woods, sometimes from right beside us. Sleep was impossible. At dawn, we packed up and left, the oppressive atmosphere lifting with the rising sun. As we walked back, toward the car, the forest fell silent once again. I never forgot that night in Whispering Pines. The way the woods seemed to breathe, the invisible watchers, the ancient stones and their silent, terrible message. The forest had spoken. We listened and lived to tell the tale. I never thought I'd find myself lost in the woods, not really. I grew up camping every summer, hiking trails that seemed endless but always familiar. But this weekend was different. My friends and I had decided to explore an old stretch of forest known as Hollow Forest, so named for the eerie silence and legends whispered by locals about strange happenings. We arrived late Friday afternoon, the sun dipping low as we set up camp beside a narrow stream that cut through towering pines. The air smelled of damp earth and moss, and the forest felt alive in a way I hadn't experienced before, dense, ancient, and watching. Our group was 4 strong: me, Sarah, Mike, and Lena. We joked and joked, trying to shake off the creeping unease that seemed to settle as twilight came. That first night after dinner, we sat by the fire swapping stories. Sarah told an old tale about the Hollow Forest's namesake, a lost village swallowed by the woods centuries ago, its residents vanishing without a trace. They say their voices can still be heard on moonless nights. As the fire flickered low, I heard it. A faint murmur, almost like a voice carried on the wind. I looked up. "Did anyone else hear that?" Mike laughed nervously. "You and your ghost stories." But Sarah fell silent, her eyes scanning the dark woods. "That's what I'm talking about," she said quietly. The whispers grew louder, almost calling our names. I felt a shiver run down my spine. We agreed to stay close, lighting extra lanterns and keeping the fire alive. Around midnight, the whispers turned to faint footsteps, crunching leaves beyond the camp. Lena grabbed a flashlight and shone it into the woods, but nothing moved. "Maybe animals," Mike suggested, but even he sounded unsure. The next day, we explored deeper. The forest was breathtaking, sunlight streaming through thick canopy, casting dappled patterns on ferns and fallen logs, but the silence was heavy, broken only by the occasional bird call or rustling twig. Near a moss-covered stone altar, I found strange carvings, ancient symbols I couldn't decipher. Sarah said they looked like old tribal markings, warnings perhaps. That night, as darkness fell, the atmosphere shifted. The forest seemed to close in. The whispers returned, closer now, urgent and pleading. I stood outside my tent, heart pounding, when I saw a pale figure at the edge of the trees. A woman in a flowing, white dress, her hair cascading like mist. She didn't speak, only watched, her eyes glowing faintly. I blinked, and she was gone. Breathless, I rushed back to camp, telling the others. They looked worried, but tried to reassure me. "We're not alone here," Sarah said. "The forest remembers." We decided to pack up the next morning. On the trail out, the whispers followed, fading only when we reached the edge of the woods. Now, every time I hear the wind through the trees, I wonder about the voices, the lost village, and the woman in white who watches from the shadows. Some places hold secrets too deep to uncover, and sometimes the forest's whispers are best left unheard. I never believed in ghost stories or forest legends. Growing up in the city, the idea of spirits lurking in the woods sounded like something meant to scare kids. But after what happened last fall in Blackwood Forest, I can't shake the feeling that some things are best left unexplored. My friends and I decided to go camping for the weekend. We wanted a break from the noise, the screens, and the concrete. Blackwood was remote, dense, and rumored to be haunted, but none of us really cared. We saw it as an adventure. We arrived just before dusk. The forest was thick with towering pines and shadows that clung to the ground like spilled ink. We picked a clearing near an old logging trail and set up camp. The air smelled of damp earth and pine sap. It was quiet. Too quiet, except for the occasional rustle of unseen animals. That first night, we sat around the fire swapping stories. As the flames flickered, I felt eyes watching us, though when I scanned the tree line, there was nothing but darkness. My friends laughed off my nerves. Then, as the fire died down, I caught a glimpse of something moving between the trees. Just a silhouette, barely there, but unmistakably watching. "Did you guys see that?" I asked, voice low. They shook their heads. "You're imagining things," Mark said, but his usual confidence sounded thin. We tried to sleep, but the forest's silence pressed in. Hours later, a low whisper drifted through the trees, soft, almost melodic, but entirely indecipherable. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. I grabbed my flashlight and wandered toward the sound, heart pounding. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing a narrow path we hadn't seen before, twisting deeper into the forest. "Be careful," Sarah warned as I moved forward. I followed the path, the whispers growing clearer but still unintelligible. They sounded like voices, old voices, calling out in a language I didn't recognize. After a few minutes, the path opened into a small glade, bathed in eerie moonlight. In the center stood a weathered stone altar covered in moss and strange carvings. Suddenly, the whispers stopped. The forest held its breath. Then I saw it, a figure cloaked in shadow standing just beyond the trees. It didn't move, just watched with glowing eyes that pierced the darkness. I froze, unable to look away. The figure raised a hand slowly, as if beckoning me. A chill ran through me. The forest seemed to pulse with life. The trees swayed without wind, and the ground beneath me felt alive. I took a step back, then another, until I was safely at the edge of the glade. The figure vanished. I ran back to camp, heart racing. When I reached the fire, my friends were awake, looking pale but relieved. "What happened?" Mark asked. I told them everything. Sarah nodded slowly. "They call it the Watcher," she said. "An ancient guardian of the forest, some say. Not evil, but not to be ignored." We agreed to pack up at first light. Before dawn, strange sounds surrounded our camp, soft footsteps, whispers, the snap of a twig, but when we looked, there was no one there. When the sun rose, the forest seemed to sigh, and the tension lifted. We left Blackwood Forest that morning with a new respect for its secrets. Now, whenever I'm near the woods, I can't help but feel that unseen eyes are watching, and sometimes when the wind is just right, I hear the faint whisper of the Watcher calling me back. There's a part of Blackwood Forest that even the locals won't go near after dark, a place where the trees grow so dense it swallows all light, and the air hangs heavy with something ancient and unseen. I didn't believe the warnings, at least not until that night. My friends and I had planned a weekend camping trip well away from the crowds. We wanted real wilderness, the kind where the stars feel close enough to touch and the silence is absolute. Blackwood seemed perfect, wild, untouched, and notoriously eerie. The stories about the Watcher, a mysterious presence said to roam those woods, were just local folklore, or so we thought. We arrived mid-afternoon and picked a clearing near a slow-moving creek. The sun filtered weakly through the tall pines, dusting the forest floor in pale gold. We set up tents and gathered wood, laughing and teasing each other about the legends. As night fell, the forest seemed to change. The usual nocturnal sounds, the hoot of an owl, the rustling of small animals, grew faint, replaced by a heavy, unnatural silence. Our campfire was small, the flames barely licking the cold air. That's when I first noticed it, a pair of glowing eyes watching from just beyond the tree line. I froze, staring into the darkness. The eyes didn't blink, didn't move. They simply observed. "Guys," I whispered, pointing. "Do you see that?" My friends laughed nervously. "Probably just a deer," Mark said, but the eyes were too still, too deliberate. Minutes passed, the fire crackled, the eyes stayed. I grabbed my flashlight and aimed it toward the edge of the woods. The beam hit nothing but dense black trunks and a thick mist creeping low over the ground. Then, a low, slow sound drifted to us, like breathing, heavy and rhythmic. The eyes vanished. A chill swept through the camp. My friends huddled closer, to the fire. We tried to laugh it off, but none of us felt at ease. Later, while the others slept, I sat by the dying embers, staring into the shadows. Suddenly, the breathing returned, closer this time, coming from behind the large oak at the edge of the clearing. My heart hammered as a figure stepped into the firelight. It was tall, unnaturally thin, with pale skin stretched tight over sharp bones. Its eyes were those same glowing orbs, cold and unblinking. It didn't speak or move toward me, just stood silently watching. I couldn't look away. The figure raised a bony hand slowly, pointing into the forest, then vanished. I woke my friends. "Something's out there," I said. "It's watching us." Mark grabbed his hunting knife. "We're leaving," he said flatly. But as we packed up, the forest seemed to shift. The trees grew tighter, paths disappeared. The way we'd come in was gone. We stumbled blindly through the woods, the heavy breathing following us growing louder, more urgent. Then, a soft voice, like a child's whisper, called my name. "Don't be afraid," it said. "I'm the Watcher. I keep the forest safe." The breathing slowed, and the mist parted to reveal a small girl, pale and translucent, her eyes glowing faintly like the creature's. She smiled sadly. "You're not in danger, but you must leave before night deepens. The forest doesn't. Forgive." The forest seemed to breathe with her words, shadows shifting and closing in. We hurried back, guided by her light until the trees thinned and the stars reappeared. When we finally broke through the edge of Blackwood, the silence broke with a chorus of birdsong. Back at the car, we looked at each other, shaken but unharmed. We never spoke of that night again, but I still feel the watchers' gaze when I pass near the forest, a reminder that some woods hold ancient eyes, always watching, guarding, waiting. The forest always had this way of feeling alive, like it was breathing, watching, waiting. I'd camped in the woods plenty of times, but nothing had prepared me for the night I spent in the pines. My friends Jake, Lila, and I wanted to escape the noise of the city. We picked a spot deep in the woods, far off any marked trails, near a small, mirror-smooth lake. The sun was dipping low when we arrived, painting the sky orange through the thick canopy of pine needles. We set up camp quickly, pitching tents and gathering wood for the fire. The air smelled damp and fresh, a hint of moss and something else, something almost metallic that I couldn't place. As darkness fell, we sat around the fire, passing around a flask of whiskey and telling stories. The sky was clear, stars pinpricks in the black dome above us, and the lake reflected the flickering flames like a second fire beneath the surface. It was around midnight when I first noticed it, a soft rustling, not the wind or animal, but something, deliberate, something watching. "Did you guys hear that?" I asked, voice low. Jake shrugged. "Probably a raccoon or something," but I wasn't so sure. The noise came again, a faint breath like someone exhaling quietly just beyond the edge of the firelight. Lila tensed. "Maybe we shouldn't be out here," she whispered. I laughed nervously, trying to shake off the unease that had crept over me, but the feeling didn't fade. If anything, it grew stronger. We tried to ignore it, but the sounds multiplied. Twigs snapping, soft footsteps padding through the underbrush, low sighs that seemed to drift just out of sight. "Let's check it out," Jake said, grabbing his flashlight. I wanted to argue, but curiosity won. We stood, dousing the fire and stepping cautiously into the darkness. The flashlight beams cut jagged swaths through the trees, revealing nothing but twisted roots and waving ferns. The breath sound stopped abruptly as we moved deeper. Then Lila froze. "Look," she whispered, pointing. In the dirt at our feet were footprints. Not human, at least not entirely. They were too large, too wide, with claws pressed into the earth. Something had been here recently. A chill went through me. Suddenly, the air shifted. A cold breeze stirred the trees, carrying with it a faint scent, earthy and sharp, like blood mixed with pine resin. The flashlight flickered. We heard it then, a voice, low and hollow, echoing around us but impossible to place. It was calling, calling in a language we didn't know, a song sung by the forest itself. "Let's get out of here," Lila urged, panic creeping into her voice. But the forest had other plans. The path back was gone. We spun around, trying to find the trail, but all we saw were trees, towering, endless, closing in like walls. The shadows lengthened and darkened, folding over us like a blanket. The voice rose again, a haunting chorus that sent shivers down my spine. And then, from the corner of my eye, I saw it, a figure moving between the trees, tall, slender, with eyes glowing faintly like embers. We held our ground, frozen with fear but safe for now. The figure stopped, head tilted as if curious, then vanished into the mist rising from the forest floor. Breathless, we backed slowly toward where the fire had been. Miraculously, the path reappeared as dawn broke, faint but clear. We didn't speak much on the hike back. The forest was silent, but the memory of that breath, the thing watching us, lingered. Back in the city, I tried to explain it, but no one believed me. "Just another campfire tale," they said. But sometimes, late at night, when the wind rustles the trees outside my window, I swear I can still hear that soft breath, the forest's quiet warning. And I know one thing for sure. some. Places in the woods aren't just empty trees and dirt. They're alive. There's a forest near my hometown that people don't talk about much anymore. Not because it's especially large or dangerous, but because of the stories. Whispers that drift through the trees like the wind itself. Hollow pines, they call it, and for decades, folks have steered clear once night falls. I never believed in such tales. As a kid, I would dare my friends to venture just beyond the edge of those trees, but we always ran back before the sun dipped too low. Now, years later, I was invited to spend a weekend camping there with 3 friends, Lena, Mark, and Jake. The plan was simple: get away from the noise of the city, camp under the stars, hike a bit, and enjoy the quiet. We arrived just before dusk, parking by the last stretch of paved road. Beyond that, it was nothing but twisted roots, thick undergrowth, and tall pines stretching endlessly upward. The air smelled of damp earth and pine resin, sharp and sweet. We set up camp near a clearing marked on an old map Mark had found in a library archive, a small flat spot beside a narrow creek. The sun was dipping low as we pitched our tents and gathered wood for a fire. The first few hours were perfect. Laughter around the fire, stories swapped, marshmallows roasted until gooey and sweet. The forest around us was alive with the chirping of crickets and the occasional rustle of something larger moving just out of sight. As night thickened, the temperature dropped sharply. We wrapped ourselves in jackets and pulled close to the firelight. Lena was telling a story about a lost hiker who'd vanished in these woods decades ago when I noticed something odd. A faint tapping coming from the trees beyond the firelight. "Did you guys hear that?" I asked, voice low. Mark looked toward the sound, frowning. "Probably a woodpecker," he said. "They make that tapping noise." But the tapping was steady and deliberate. Too rhythmic, too close. It wasn't a bird. Then Lena shushed us. "Listen." A faint whisper rose in the air, almost drowned out by the crackling flames. It was unintelligible at first, like the wind weaving through the branches, but then clearer, like words just out of reach. "Go back." My skin prickled, and I scanned the darkness beyond our circle of light. The trees stood tall and silent, shadows stretching long and thin. "Who's there?" I called, half expecting silence. Instead, the whisper came again, this time sounding like a soft sigh right beside my ear. We all jumped back toward the fire. Jake grabbed his flashlight, sweeping the beam into the trees. Nothing, just darkness. "It's probably an animal," Jake said, but even he sounded uncertain. As the fire died down to glowing embers, the whispering continued, weaving between the trees, surrounding us. It wasn't angry or threatening. It was almost mournful, like a lament. I told myself it was the forest, alive and old, speaking through the rustling leaves and creaking branches. Still, none of us wanted to be alone, so we stayed close, telling each other stories to drown out the haunting sounds. At some point, I noticed a faint glow far off, flickering through the trees like a candlelight. "Do you see that?" I asked. The others nodded, uneasy. Without thinking, I stood and started walking toward it, curiosity driving me through the thick brush. The glow pulsed gently, casting long shadows, and the air grew colder with every step. When I reached the source, I found an old lantern hanging from a gnarled branch. The light flickered softly, its glass dusty but intact. Beneath it was a small, weathered wooden shrine, covered in moss and carved with symbols I didn't recognize. The smell of damp wood and pine filled the air. I felt a sudden presence, a calm, watching silence that made my skin crawl. "Come back," a voice whispered, barely audible as if carried on the wind itself. I hurried back to the campfire, the warmth comforting. The others looked relieved to see me, their faces pale. We agreed to pack up at first light, but that night, the whispering didn't stop. It seemed to seep into my dreams, the voice calling, warning, pleading. When dawn finally came, the forest was quiet again, normal and still. We left hollow pines behind, the whispers fading with the morning mist. Even now, I hear that voice sometimes, soft, distant, echoing from the deep woods. Some things in the forest aren't meant to be disturbed. Some voices are meant only to be heard, not answered. I never believed in the stories about the forest, that it was alive in some ancient way, watching you, speaking to you. But after that weekend in the Whispering Pines, I'm not so sure anymore. My friends and I planned the trip for months. We needed a break from city life, from endless noise and deadlines. So we packed up our gear and headed to a remote campsite deep in the woods, where the pines grew so thick and tall the sunlight barely touched the ground. The drive there was long and winding, the road turning from pavement to gravel, then to nothing but dirt rutted with tire tracks and fallen branches. We joked about how we might not even make it back if the stories about the forest were true, but it was all in good fun. By late afternoon, we arrived at a small clearing next to a creek. The water was so clear I could see the smooth stones beneath. The surface and the air smelled of pine sap and wet earth, perfect for camping. We set up the tents, gathered firewood, and prepared for a night under the stars. The first few hours were easy. Laughter, campfire songs, the crunch of marshmallows toasted to perfection. The woods were quiet except for the occasional hoot of an owl and the rustle of leaves. But as night deepened, the silence grew heavier. There was something almost too still about the woods, as if the trees were holding their breath. That's when we started hearing it. A low murmur, like a chorus of voices just beyond the firelight. At first, I thought it was the wind, or maybe animals communicating. But then it took shape, a whispering chant, distant but unmistakably human. "Did you hear that?" I asked, eyes scanning the shadowy tree line. My friend Mark nodded, his face tight. "Yeah, it's coming from over there." He pointed toward a narrow trail leading deeper into the forest. Curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped off the path, moving toward the sound. The others stayed by the fire, wary but too intrigued to stop me. The whispering grew louder, clearer, but no words I recognized. It was hypnotic, almost melodic, drawing me forward like a siren's call. I followed the narrow trail, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The trees closed in around me, their trunks like silent sentinels. Suddenly, the ground beneath me gave way to soft moss and tangled roots. I stopped at the edge of a small clearing bathed in moonlight. In the center stood a circle of ancient stones, covered in moss and carved with symbols I didn't understand. The whispering came from the stones themselves, or maybe from the air between them. I shivered, the hairs on my arms rising. The voices weren't angry or threatening, but they carried a warning, a sadness older than the forest. Before I could move, I felt a gentle breeze brush past me. It carried the scent of damp earth and pine, but also something else. Something faintly sweet and metallic. And then I saw her, a figure in white, barely visible, drifting just beyond the circle. Her face was pale and serene, eyes closed as if in deep prayer or mourning. I blinked, and she was gone. I hurried back to the campfire, heart pounding. My friends stared as I explained what I'd seen. "Sounds like the spirit of the forest," Mark said, voice low. "The old stories call her the Pine Maiden. She's said to protect the woods, warning those who would harm it." We sat in silence, the fire crackling between us. The whispering had stopped, replaced by the natural chorus of night sounds, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of an owl. None of us slept well. The forest seemed to watch us with unseen eyes, its breath cold and steady. In the morning, we packed up and left quickly. the sun filtering through the trees like a promise of safety. I don't know if I'll ever return to Whispering Pines, but sometimes when the wind is just right, I swear I can hear that soft chanting, a reminder that some forests keep their secrets and their guardians hidden in the shadows. I never believed in the kind of stories people tell about the woods, how they're haunted by restless spirits or creatures lurking just beyond the firelight. But after what happened last fall, I'm not so sure anymore. It started when my friends and I decided to go camping in the northern Cascades, far from any roads or cell towers. We wanted to get away from the city noise and distractions. Just 4 of us, a couple of tents, a fire, and the endless wilderness. We picked a spot near a narrow creek, surrounded by towering pines and thick underbrush. The first day was perfect. Clear skies, birdsong, the scent of damp earth and resin. We hiked a little, collected firewood, and joked around the campfire, trading scary stories just to pass the time. But as night fell, the forest took on a different personality. Quiet, watchful, as if it were holding its breath. Around midnight, I was lying on my sleeping bag, staring up at the canopy where moonlight sifted through the pine needles. That's when I heard it, the first sound that didn't belong. A faint scraping noise like claws dragging slowly over bark, coming from the edge of the camp. I sat up, heart pounding. Did you guys hear that? Jake, who was closest to the fire, nodded slowly. Yeah, it's probably just a raccoon or something. But the sound didn't stop. It got louder, closer, rhythmic and deliberate. Something was moving out there, in the shadows, watching us. Without thinking, I grabbed my flashlight and shone it toward the noise. The beam cut through the dark trees but revealed nothing, just the thick forest floor and a blanket of fallen needles. Maybe it's nothing, I said, trying to convince myself. But my hands were shaking. Then I heard whispering, soft, indistinct, voices carried on the wind. At first, I thought it was the trees rustling, but the voices didn't sound like nature. They sounded urgent. I called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" The whispering stopped. For a moment, everything was still. Then a figure appeared just beyond the firelight. It was a man, tall and thin, wearing an old-fashioned coat that looked out of place, like he stepped out of a different century. His face was pale, his eyes dark and hollow. My breath caught in my throat. Who are you?" I managed. He said nothing, just lifted a finger to his lips, an unmistakable gesture for silence, and pointed deeper into the woods. Against my better judgment, I followed. The forest grew darker, the trees closing in like towering walls. The man's footsteps were silent, but my own felt heavy and clumsy. The whispers returned, now clearer, fragments of words in an old dialect I didn't understand. We came to a small clearing, and there in the center was a stone marker, covered in moss and carvings. I ran my fingers over it. The symbols looked ancient, some kind of warning or memorial. The man turned to me and spoke at last, his voice barely audible. "Those who wander here after dusk, they stir what should sleep." A chill ran down my spine. "What do you mean? What sleeps here?" He gestured to the darkness beyond the clearing. Old anger, forgotten pain. The forest remembers. Suddenly, the air grew icy and the shadows seemed to shift, like something alive just beyond sight. The whispers swelled into a low chant, echoing all around us. The man faded, dissolving into mist like a shadow retreating from dawn. I was alone again, standing in the cold clearing. I stumbled, back to camp as fast as I could, my flashlight flickering. When I burst into the circle of firelight, my friends looked up, concern etched on their faces. "What happened?" Sarah asked. I don't know," I said, voice trembling. "But there's something here, something old." We decided then and there to pack up at first light. That night, the whispers never stopped. They circled us, a cold presence just beyond the fire's glow. But no harm came. We huddled close, our fear holding the darkness at bay. The next morning, the forest was calm again, the haunting gone with the dawn. We left that day. The memory of the shadow beneath the pines burned deep in my mind. Since then, I never underestimate the woods, and I never wander far after dark. Because some places remember, and some shadows never truly fade. The woods had always been a place of comfort for me, a refuge from the noise of the world. So when my friends suggested a weekend camping trip deep in the ancient forest outside town, I was eager. We wanted to escape cell signals, roads, and crowds. Just the tall trees, the cool air, and the soft rustle of leaves. We set out early Saturday morning, backpacks heavy but spirits high. The trail we chose was barely marked, twisting through towering pines and tangled undergrowth. By midday, we found a small clearing near a stream, perfect for our camp. The first evening was everything we hoped for: a crackling fire, laughter, and the scent of pine needles mixed with roasting marshmallows. As twilight faded, the woods grew quiet, the kind of quiet that presses against your skin. Our voices softened, replaced by the occasional crack of a branch or the distant call of an owl. Then came the silence. Not just the natural hush of the forest, but a deeper, heavier quiet, like the world had been holding its breath. I was the last one awake, lying on my sleeping pad and staring up through the canopy of needles to the star-studded sky. That's when I heard it, a soft crunch, maybe footsteps moving just beyond the firelight. I sat up and scanned the darkness with my flashlight, but the beam revealed only swaying branches and empty shadows. "Did you guys hear that?" I whispered. "Nope," came the sleepy reply from the tent. I wanted to shrug it off, to believe it was an animal or the wind, but the feeling didn't leave me. Then, almost imperceptibly, I caught a whisper, a voice so faint I almost thought, I imagined it. "Help me." My heart thudded painfully in my chest. I nudged my friend Mark awake. "Mark, did you hear that?" He groaned but listened. "Hear what?" That whisper. "Someone's out there." He shook his head. "It's just the forest messing with you. You've been staring at the dark too long." But I wasn't so sure. The whisper came again, clearer this time. Not words exactly, but a soft, mournful call. Unable to resist, I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out into the cold night. The fire's glow retreated behind me as I moved deeper into the woods, drawn by the voice. The trees towered above, their silhouettes sharp against the sky, and the forest floor was a tangled mess of roots and fallen leaves. I followed the sound until I reached a small clearing I hadn't noticed before. The moonlight spilled over a circle of ancient stones worn smooth by time. The whispers stopped as soon as I stepped into the circle. Silence wrapped around me, thick and suffocating. I scanned the stones. On one, a carving caught my eye. A delicate symbol resembling a tree with branches that seemed to reach out like hands. Suddenly, a chill ran through me, and from the shadows a figure emerged. A woman in white, her face pale and her eyes dark pools that shimmered with something not quite human. She spoke, voice soft and trembling. "You must leave before the forest claims you." I blinked, heart pounding, unsure if I was dreaming or trapped in some nightmare. "Who are you?" I asked, voice barely steady. "A guardian," she said. "A watcher for those who forget the old ways." Then she vanished, melting into the trees as silently as she had come. I turned to run but found the path back blocked by thick brambles that hadn't been there moments before. Panic surged, but I forced myself to calm down. Remembering her warning, I whispered, "I will leave." The brambles thinned, the path cleared, and I stumbled back to camp, breathless and shaken. My friends were awake now, eyes wide with concern. "I saw her," I told them. "A woman, a guardian. She warned me to leave." They exchanged nervous glances but said nothing. The rest of the night passed in tense silence. At first light, we packed up and left without looking back. To this day, I don't know what that figure was, ghost, spirit, or something else, but the forest is no longer just a refuge for me. It's a place alive with stories, warnings, and secrets that don't always want to be found. Sometimes, when the wind whistles through the pines on a quiet night, I swear I hear her whisper again, reminding me that some woods are meant to be respected, not explored. I never believed in ghost stories or forest legends. To me, the woods were just trees and shadows, nothing more. But after that weekend camping trip with my friends in Hollow Pines, I can't say the same. We planned the trip for months, just 4 of us escaping the city for the calm of the deep woods. Hollow Pines was supposed to be the perfect spot, remote, untouched, with an old ranger cabin nearby for emergencies. The area had a reputation for being peaceful but mysterious, and that was exactly why we chose it. The first day was everything we hoped for: crisp air, golden leaves crunching beneath our boots, and endless stretches of towering pine trees. We set up camp near a small lake that shimmered under the autumn sun. At night, the forest was quiet, the only sound the soft ripple of water and the occasional hoot of an owl. On the second night, after a big dinner of grilled fish and campfire stories, I was lying back on a blanket, staring up through the canopy at the stars flickering through the branches. That's when I noticed it. A flicker of movement just beyond the edge of our firelight. At first, I thought it was an animal, a deer or maybe a fox, but then the shadows moved again, slower this time. A figure appeared, a woman in a flowing, white dress, standing perfectly still near the tree line. I blinked, unsure if my eyes were playing tricks. "Did you see that?" I whispered. My friend Jake glanced over, frowning. "See what?" The figure vanished. We laughed it off. Hollow Pines played tricks on your mind, we said. But later that night, the strange thing started. I was inside the tent when I heard it. A soft tapping on the canvas. I opened the flap and looked out. The forest was dark and still. Nothing there. Then the tapping came again, this time on the wooden ranger cabin door a few yards away. My friends were too tired to investigate, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. The next day, we found strange footprints in the mud near the lake, small, barefoot, and not like any animal I'd seen. They led toward the deeper woods and stopped abruptly. Curious, we decided to follow the path the footprints had taken. The deeper we went, the denser the forest became. The light dimmed beneath the thick canopy, and an eerie silence fell over us. Suddenly, the wind shifted, and I heard a soft voice, so faint I thought I imagined it, calling my name. "Alex." I spun around, but no one was there. My heart pounded as we pressed on, the trees seeming to close in around us. Then we came to a clearing where an ancient stone altar stood, covered in moss and carved with symbols we didn't recognize. The air was cold and still, the kind of silence that presses on your chest. Jake stepped forward and brushed off the moss. "What is this place?" Before anyone could answer, the voice came again, this time louder and more desperate. "Leave, before it's too late." We all froze. The shadows around the clearing seemed to ripple, and from the trees emerged the woman in white, the same figure I'd seen the night before. Her eyes were hollow, her face pale as the moonlight filtering through the branches. She raised a hand, pointing toward the east, where the sun had just begun to set. "We shouldn't be here," she whispered, her voice like the rustle of dead leaves. Terrified but respectful, we turned and hurried back to camp, the forest seeming to guide us away. Once safe beside our fire, The figure was gone, but the feeling lingered, like the forest was alive, watching, waiting. That night, none of us slept. The whispers continued, soft voices weaving through the trees like a warning. At dawn, we packed, in up and left hollow pines, the shadows retreating behind us. I never told many people about what happened, not because I was scared, but because some things are better left unspoken. But sometimes, when the wind blows through the trees or the sky shimmers with the moon's pale light, I swear I hear her voice calling me back to the woods, an echo of the hollow pines that still haunts my dreams. The forest always feels different at night, but Hollow Pines was something else entirely. My friends and I had planned this trip for months. Just 4 of us, no cell service, no distractions, only the dense woods and our campfire. It was supposed to be a weekend getaway to recharge, but that night, well, it changed everything. We arrived just as the sun dipped behind the trees, the orange light filtering through the needles like spilled paint on glass. We set up camp near an old logging trail where the trees stretched endlessly, standing like ancient sentinels. The air was crisp, the smell of damp earth and pine needles thick. Our fire was small but steady. We roasted hot dogs, swapped stories, and laughed under the sprawling canopy of stars. I remember thinking how peaceful it was, how the forest seemed to breathe around us, alive and watching. But as darkness deepened, the silence grew heavy. It wasn't just the absence of noise, it was something else, an almost tangible stillness pressing in on us. Somewhere deep in the woods, a soft whisper began, almost like the wind stirring the branches. At first, we ignored it. Probably the wind, Jake said, tossing another log on the fire, but the whispering didn't stop. It grew clearer, shaping into words, faint, fragmented, yet chilling. Leave. Go back. We exchanged uneasy glances. The fire flickered, shadows twisting grotesquely against the trees. Maybe it's an animal caught in the brush, Sarah suggested, though her voice trembled. I grabbed my flashlight and scanned the tree line. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but swaying branches and glinting eyes reflecting far away. Then, a figure appeared, a silhouette at the edge of the clearing just beyond the firelight. It stood perfectly still, watching. "Did you see that?" I whispered, heart pounding. Jake nodded. "Yeah, someone's out there." I called out, "Hello? Who's there?" No answer. Only the whispering, now closer, almost right behind us. The figure vanished, slipping between the trees like a shadow melting into the night. Unease settled deep in my bones. We decided to stay by the fire, sticking close together. Minutes passed like hours. Then the whispering returned, weaving through the trees like a thread of ice. "Go back." The voice was almost gentle this time, like a warning, but unmistakably human. "Who are you?" I called, stepping toward the forest's edge. No reply. I peered into the darkness, trying to see any sign of movement. Then I noticed something strange. The trees nearest the clearing weren't just swaying. Their branches bent inward, as if bowing to some unseen force. Suddenly, I caught sight of something on the ground. A circle of smooth stones, arranged carefully around a small sapling, its leaves shimmering faintly even in the night. Sarah stepped closer and gasped. "Look at this!" Carvings, intricate and ancient, were etched into the stones, symbols we couldn't recognize but unmistakably purposeful. The whispering grew louder, echoing around the clearing. Protect, respect, leave. A chill crawled over my skin. We all felt it. The forest itself was alive with something old, something watching. We gathered our things quietly, the fire's glow dimming as we prepared to leave. Just as we stepped onto the trail, the whispering stopped. Silence enveloped us. The walk back felt different, lighter somehow. The stars seemed to shine clearer, and the forest no longer felt menacing. When we finally reached the edge of the woods, I looked back once. Among the trees, a single lantern flickered, warm and steady, as if bidding us farewell. We never spoke much about that night, but I carry the memory with me. The whispering forest, the silent watcher, and the ancient warning to respect the land. And I know some places aren't just empty woods. They hold stories waiting in the shadows, whispering on the wind. There's a certain kind of silence in the deep woods that feels unnatural, like the forest is holding its breath, waiting for something. I learned that on a camping trip last fall, one that began with laughter and ended with the kind of quiet you never want to hear again. My friends and I had wanted to get away from everything, phones, city noise, and crowds, so we packed up and headed for Hollow Woods, a stretch of dense forest about 4 hours from town. The place was famous for old logging trails and a few abandoned cabins, the perfect setting for a weekend escape. The first day was all sunshine and fresh air. We hiked the trails, told stories by the river, and roasted hot dogs over a campfire. But as night fell, the woods changed. We set up camp in a small clearing surrounded by tall pines, their branches creaking softly in the wind. The firelight flickered over our faces as we talked, the flames casting long shadows that danced on the trees. The stars were bright and cold, spilling across the sky like spilled salt. Around midnight, I noticed something strange. The usual forest sounds had stopped. No chirping crickets, no rustling leaves, not even the occasional owl. Just silence, thick and heavy. Then came the whisper. It was faint at first, almost drowned by the crackling fire, but unmistakably there. A soft voice calling my name. I looked around, heart pounding. "Did you hear that?" I asked the group. "Nope," one friend said, shaking his head. "Must be the wind," but I knew it wasn't wind. The whisper came again, clearer this time. "Come, come." Curiosity pulled me away from the fire, and before anyone could stop me, I was walking toward the edge of the clearing, flashlight in hand. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the thick underbrush and gnarled tree trunks. I followed the sound, deeper into the woods where the moonlight barely touched the ground. The voice led me to a narrow path I hadn't seen before. It twisted through the trees, flanked by towering ferns and wildflowers glowing faintly in the moonlight. The whispering grew louder, echoing softly between the trunks. Suddenly, the path opened to a small glade, where an old stone well stood, covered in moss and vines. The whispers stopped as I approached, replaced by a low hum, like the forest itself was breathing. I leaned over the edge, shining my flashlight down the darkness inside. The beam disappeared into nothingness, but I thought I heard something. A faint splash, like water disturbed. Then a cold breeze swept through the glade, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic and old. Stepped back, heart racing as the voice returned, this time clearer and closer. "Help. Me." My flashlight flickered, and for a moment I saw a pale face staring up from the well's depths, eyes wide with fear, lips mouthing the word again. I gasped and stumbled back, calling out to my friends. They came running, worried, but when I pointed to the well, it was empty. "Probably just your imagination," one said, trying to lighten the mood, but none of us felt right after that. The fire seemed dimmer, the shadows deeper. We decided to pack up and leave at dawn. As we walked back, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The trees seemed to lean in closer, whispering secrets I couldn't understand. Back at camp, I found strange scratches on a nearby tree, deep, claw-like marks arranged in a rough spiral. No animal I knew could have made them. The night passed, with restless dreams, whispers, shadows moving just beyond my vision, and the sensation of cold fingers brushing my skin. When morning came, the forest felt less ominous but still held its secrets tight. We left Hollow Woods quickly. The image of the well and that pleading face burned into my mind. I've never told anyone what I really saw that night, partly because I'm not sure I fully believe it myself. But sometimes, when the wind howls through the trees on a quiet night, I swear I hear that voice again, soft, urgent, calling me back to the woods. And I know some places in this world hold on to things, memories, fears, souls that never truly leave.